Hello, welcome to Handmade by Alyssa. And today we're working on a desk. I'm really excited to start it. You know, some pieces probably should actually go to the garbage or to the dump or be burned. And this one was pretty close to needing that. The top was so warped from water, moisture, and maybe it was set outside, maybe it wasn't protected from water sitting on the surface, but it was pretty rough. Most of it is just surface. Nothing structurally is wrong with it, but it needed a lot of work. So in this video, you're going to see me transform this desk or vanity. It's a waterfall era style, and I'm going to transform it into like a little bit rustic but still feminine. So you'll see some transfers, you'll maybe see some teal paint, and we're going to beautify it. So follow along to see more. The first step is to remove all of that peeling and bubbled veneer. There's probably some type of wood beneath it, and we want to get to that. The goal, in my opinion, is to still have some type of wood-looking surface on a desk. Paint is fine, but I just really like the look and stability of having a poly-sealed finish to write on. So first, I'm going to try peeling off whatever's loose, and then I did have to pull out my heat gun, which honestly makes the process so much smoother, but even that was a little tricky on some of these big pieces. So then I opted to do some soaking, which just means getting a big towel, getting it completely soaked with some regular water, and then laying it over top of all the veneer. I let it go for several hours, probably 4 to 8 hours, depending if this is how I measure time, over nap time when my babies are sleeping or over nighttime when everyone's in bed. And then as soon as that's over, then I remove the towel in sections, scraping and peeling up what I can, and again, pulling the heat gun out, which those two things, the soaking and the heat, just loosens up the adhesive so that you can remove the veneer. Now that the veneer has successfully been completely removed, I need to sand it down. So I'm going to start with 60 grit just because it is really rough, and I need to knock down some of that texture, some of the splintering. It is going to be a rustic themed desk, but we don't want it that rustic that you're going to be getting splinters on it. So I started with 60, and then I did, I think it was 120. And I don't think I'm going to go much further than that just because I need the grain to be open to accept whatever product I use, and then we'll sand it a little smoother than that later. I'd like to get a nice brown color on this surface. So I'm going to start with using Heirloom Traditions paint, antiquing gel in the vintage brown color. I could use a stain, but I'm choosing not to because this antiquing gel it's kind of movable. It has a little bit more flexibility to it with water. And I want to still see the rusticness of this grain pattern, but I just want to color the wood. The trouble I might have here is uniformity, so we might have to pivot and change the plan as we go. But right now, I'm going to use the vintage brown antiquing gel from Heirloom Traditions paint. And what I do is I first start by just a light misting with my water bottle over the surface, and this just allows, it prevents the product to completely absorb as soon as it hits the surface. It allows me to move it around and distribute it a little bit more evenly before it starts to dry and soak in and set up. So I mist as I move, and once I feel like I have it even, then I let it dry, and we'll go from there. The brown antiquing gel turned out to be a little bit more translucent than what I was looking for. You can still see a lot of the pigment changes in the wood itself under here. And I am now using oil rubbed black antiquing gel from Heirloom. And since it's in the same product family, I know that it will go on fine. They'll work together. There won't be any weird reactions. So it is going on a little bit more opaque, which is what I'm wanting to even out the colors. And I am going back and pouncing in certain areas just to help even out any of the streaking that I find. When I have a moment, I remove the hardware, clean them up, and get them ready to spray. I'm using Rust-Oleum's Universal Advanced Formula, flat black. It's paint and primer in one. It's for any surface. And get them cleaned up and ready to go. Cleaning the piece of any grime or oils that have built up on it is really important for the paint to adhere. So I'm using my liquid sandpaper deglosser. Heirloom Traditions Paint has a brand of that you can order with your supplies, or you can use Clean Strip or Jasco, whatever's at your closest hardware store. What's important though is to find one that is no rinse. So you scrub it on really well and wipe it off with a dry towel, and then you're set to paint. Finally, the fun part, we're ready to paint. I like to use my brush and roller, which is also recommended by the paint company, just to get that smooth, flawless finish. And I slap it on with my brush, roll it out gently with my roller, and you get a really smooth, no brush stroke finish. And the color we're using is Capri, which is a really beautiful teal. And I'll probably get 2 coats on and get pretty good coverage. First coat actually has gotten us really good coverage, but I see some areas that need more, so I'm gonna go right back and do a second coat. While the paint is drying, I'm going to go ahead and seal the top. For several reasons, I chose to use matte polyacrylic. The first one is that it will probably bump up onto the painted edges of this top. And for that reason, I don't want it to be noticeable. And I have found over the last couple years that matte polyacrylic tends to match the matte low luster sheen finish of the paint I most often use, which is Heirloom Traditions paint. So if it bumps up on the sides, you're not going to see a color change or a sheen change. It's going to be completely unnoticeable here. And most of the time when I put a top coat on, it seamlessly runs right over the edge, but since the painted edge is coming up on the sides, that was something I had to consider. The other reason why I'm using polyacrylic is because I will be using transfers on this piece, and polyurethane oil-based tends to react a little problematic with transfers. It can break them down, and it can work, but I've had trouble with it in the past. I never have trouble with water-based polyacrylic, so I know that if I decide to place transfers up on the top, I will want to seal it with polyacrylic, so I might as well go ahead and use that product as its base. Okay, the next step is to distress it, but not in the typical way that I distress with like sandpaper. It'll be with an antiquing gel. This overall piece will be very rustic. Even with the floral transfers on it, it might even give like a very slight Western, rustic, a little grungy vibe. So I will probably distress it later with sandpaper, but right now I just want to antique the finish itself. So I'm going to use the same oil rubbed black antiquing gel that I used on top, but I'm going to use it a little differently. I have a scraper and a chip brush. There was a piece probably a month or so ago that I applied multiple layers of colors over an arm wire with this, and I'll probably do a combination of this and some dry brushing, just depending on how it's getting laid on the surface. And I put the drawers back in the piece so that we can get a continuous flow. You could do it separate, but then you're only going to have the application on the drawers, and then it will be different on here. Rather, if you put them on, just make sure you can get them back out. If you put them in the piece, you can carry the finish across both, so it looks more deliberate rather than misplaced. So, and there's a zillion ways to antique a piece of furniture, but this is how I do it. Okay, so you just want to barely dip the edge into the antiquing gel, which you could use paint. You don't have to use the antiquing gel. I just don't want it to be too heavy, which is why I want to use the gel, which is a little bit more translucent than paint would be. You could also wash it. You could do 50-50 water and paint with like a dark brown or a black, and then wipe off excess, and that would also antique it. So this way though, I have it dipped. I just have barely a little bit on the edge there. I'm gonna almost hold it flat, like parallel with the surface, and just drag it across. And the more skipping, the better. So the more flat you have it, the more skipping there will be, getting that like pebbly, antique-y look. The less chunky, the better. So I don't really want these big chunks. So I'll probably even that out later when I sand. I might even go back with a wet cloth. You can wet distress, which just means you're wiping off the product before it cures. And with water on a towel or a rag, you can scrub it really hard, which will remove it before it cures. So you're able to kind of distress it that way. And you can choose if you want to do it over the edges or over the flat surface. I should probably get something to pull this out. It's hard for me to put it flat against it when it's inset. I think I'll just do these drawers and then show you how to wipe it back. Okay. I don't want it too heavy because I'm also going to balance distressing with it too. Maybe let's do a little bit of dry brushing here. So I barely dipped the tip, got just the tips of the brush in the product. I could even have a plate and offload, but I don't think I'm going to need to do that necessarily. You can go both directions or one. I'm going to try wet distressing. Now at the same time. So I just have my water bottle and a rag, and I'm just going to mist overall. And you could just be working with a wet rag too. That would be fine. There. And that kind of just got rid of those big chunky spots. So that, I like how that looks. It's got just enough. Right here, I just kind of have my fingertip in the towel. So I'm able to concentrate the pressure where I feel like the antiquing is too much. And I'm okay with some chunkiness. I just don't want it as heavy as paint. Because overall, this will be a very rustic piece. So I'm fully embracing that. I'm just looking for balance. We're putting large pink flowers over top of this. So get ready for that. So it'll be a nice balance of rustic and feminine all together. It's not everyone's taste, but you know what? My goal isn't to please everybody. I like to provide a variety of designs, and that way you see a little bit of everything here. All right, let's see if you can see that well on the camera. Okay, I'm gonna take it off my stand, and I'll zoom in so you can see it a little better. Right now it looks a little haphazard. That middle drawer looks perfect though. And you'll see it come together once the transfer is put on, and then once I distress it, and once I get the hardware on. I'll go ahead and complete the whole piece. We're finally ready for transfers. Antiquing gel is dry. We'll get it on, seal it. I may decide to antique it, I'm not sure yet, just depends. Sometimes the color behind the transfer comes through just a tad, which will then mute the vibrancy, which I'm thinking, since this is overall rustic and antiqued, that we wouldn't want this to look like fresh, brand new transfer plopped on, because then it's more likely to look like a sticker or an add-on rather than part of the piece that is aged along with the age of the finish. So we'll decide later if I want to maybe dry brush some of the antiquing gel over the transfer. But right now, let's open it up and decide placement. And you'll get to hear my spiel or my soapbox moment of transfer placement. Everyone does it differently. My personal opinion with transfers is that they can easily be applied out of balance. So like on these sheets, oftentimes they're either in a specific swag that's really large that you can put across the middle of a dresser. You could cut it apart and use it different ways, but they're created in that image. Other times, like this one, there are clusters of flowers on the paper. And if you apply them just like the paper, they'll look like floating polka dots without anything grounding it or connecting it to the next image. So for me, to make sense of the piece, I like to have them swag or connect. Then they look a little more natural or organic in their placement, not so polka dotty. But then sometimes there are some transfers you can put on evenly distributed as long as they're full, and it can maybe look like the pattern of an old wallpaper. But sometimes it just seems like they're floating, and that's what we don't want to happen. So here, especially with a desk or vanity, whatever you want this will be, we want one thing to lead to another. See how, like the flowers and the blooms on here, if we put them straight across, we're just gonna have some random leaves floating, and the leaves don't have a stem, they're not connected to anything, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I think visually, we want connection, and we want flow, and we also want balance. It doesn't need to be symmetrical. If anything, I would stay away from symmetrical, but maybe opposites. So asymmetrical, whatever. I do know I want to put like a grouping up here on the corner, which then maybe will come around the corner, come down this way, and if it's down here, maybe I'll have some across the top here that will then come down on this side instead of the upper portion on the other. So they won't necessarily connect from this side to that, although they might. Maybe it will kind of come in here, I'm not sure. We'll see where it goes. Let's see what we have here. I have one complete transfer. This one's called Rose Quartz by Redesign with Prima. Then I had some leftovers from another project of the same transfer that I'm gonna piece together in case I need more than one, which I do wanna, sometimes I use just a little bit from one transfer and then save it and use it for other pieces. But this one I do want to make quite a statement. I wanna have a lot of pink on here. I think it's really gonna pop on this teal. One little flower isn't gonna make that wow on this one, but this pink, this fuchsia and peach is really gonna contrast on the teal, so we wanna load it on. Okay, so I think we'll save this one for this corner. And this one is the same. So I think I will make sure it doesn't come onto this side. And we'll put this one over here. Maybe we'll use this one coming down here and then fill in with some other bits. So you'll see, oh, I need to get my blades, how I cut them apart and place them. Oh, I got my blade, which this is helpful for the drawers. So sometimes we'll cut ahead, there are lines. Other times, to make sure it's continuous and you don't cut it too short, you take the image on and trim it right where you need it. For me, it's kind of different every time. Just depends how the piece is doing. For those who have had trouble with transfers, maybe they tear or rip, you're not alone. That happens to everybody who uses transfers. So they are, some will call them decals, which drives me crazy because they're not stickers. They're not thick and they're not glossy like a sticker. The best way I can think of to describe them is a thin ink printed image, which when applied correctly or well and sealed, they almost look like they're painted on. You wouldn't, like, whereas if it was a decal, you would clearly see that that's like a sticker that you put on. So, although I'm sure there are ways that you can work with a decal or a vinyl application to make it look less sticker-like. So, nothing against those, but I really like transfers just because they blend into your surface really seamlessly. So, I tend to approach them with the attitude that I will likely rip or tear, or there is bound to be some type of mishap. No fault to the transfer, that is user error. Either I'm too anxious in pulling the paper away, and either the transfer is ready to let go or it isn't. And I'll show you how I just kind of gently pull the paper back so you can see as the transfer releases. And if it's not ready, you lay it back down and you rub it some more. And sometimes they're a pain in the butt to get to release, and other times they come off with no problem. There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to it. It's just work on it till you get it. And sometimes they come off flawlessly and it's an easy application. Other times I go back in with either two responses to a mishap. I either heavily distress it, so it's part of the nature of the design, or I touch it up, get some of my paints out, small brushes, and if I have a crack or a tear, I just kind of touch in those areas. And you'll never know that there was damage done. We're gonna go ahead and get this one in here, since I know where that's gonna go. I think I'll start with getting like the big clusters on, and then we'll go back in and kind of fill in with the small blooms. Sometimes I cut it out and lay out all the pieces on the floor where I want them to go. But for this one, I think I just want to get the foundation of the large groupings. So, I think here. Now this is going to be a little tricky, only because it's not just a completely flat surface, which is usually the most ideal. I have these ridges here, I have these ridges in between each drawer, and the ridges going over the side. So what you want to do is get the main flat surface adhered first. Don't even touch those sides yet. I'll push it right up here. And I kind of run my fingers over it, smooth it on. And now to be able to fold it into those areas I cut to release some pressure, and then you're able to fold some things down. So I just have this handy little blade, and I'm just gonna cut underneath the drawer. And I'm bound to mess this up too. Luckily, if you cut the transfer in the wrong place, you can push it back down. It's not a problem. All right, there's the groove. lucky for me, I do plan to distress this, which will help me if I have any user errors, which I already did. See, I already cut that in the wrong spot. I'm gonna know all my mistakes on this one. There we go. And now I'm gonna do, and as you cut the transfer, go ahead and press it down on the next area. This leaf will carry over. And when you press it down, it tends to stay put a little better. Okay. All right. Very good. Let's get this started. I'm gonna go ahead and get on these really tiny pieces because they're so small that the plastic covering is going to pop off. So let's get those on. There we go. And then once the plastic releases, smooth it over with your finger. If I can bring you closer. Okay. I'll try not to block. So just press it all over the plastic. Don't go too aggressively over the sides because you may rip the plastic back, which then buckles the transfer. And whatever the transfer touches, it will likely adhere to, even skin. So you can wash it off, but it's a real pain in the butt, becomes a sticky, it just grabs onto it. So if you accidentally lay it on a surface you don't want it to touch, you will likely damage the transfer and not be able to use that image. Okay. I'm trying to find a corner, and I lift the corner as I press, and I keep an eye on the other side to see that it's releasing, because if it's not releasing and I keep pulling, I'm going to stretch the transfer and tear it. Which sometimes I do when I'm a little anxious to get the project moving. I just ripped some in this crevice, but that's okay. I'm distressing. I'll just tell myself to chill. And I'm doing a video. The kids are getting picked up from school, so that was my husband. Oh, my other two babies are sleeping right now. I have 2 school-age kids and 1 preschool and 1 who really wants to be big. I'm gonna move over here. And then if it looks crinkled or not quite adhered, we will go back after you peel the whole plastic off and smooth it with our fingers. This one's coming back up. There we go. This one's popping up, so I'm just gonna skip down here. Smooth it out with my fingers. what I'll probably do is take my sanding sponge over it, and then so I don't completely destroy the image, I will seal it, decide if I'm going to antique it, and then I'll take either a sheet of paper or my sander and just kind of go over the edges. And I do want some heavy spots of distressing, but I don't want them on the images. Maybe just some light distressing. But if I do that before sealing, it will likely grab, and you never know. I would rather not destroy the transfer and then wish I hadn't taken my sander over it. Sealing will protect it from anything too harsh. All right. Ooh, that's coming off pretty easy. So with my thumbs, I'm pushing it down in the cracks of the grooves here. Okay. There we go. Okay, that is all ready, so I just need to finish this corner. And sometimes I hold on to the tail end of it with my stick, because as you pull it, if it's not yet completely released, nothing's holding it to the transfer, and it just pulls that very tip of the transfer off. So until I get there and I realize it's completely released, then I can let go. All right. So a lot wrong happened here. Of course it's me because I'm hasty, but I will show you my remedies in the end. Anyways, you'll see it all come together. So I'm pressing it all down, and then I'm going to take you off the stand, take you up closer to see all of my consequences. Unless you can see them from there. There's a lot going on here. But again, I'm not going for a perfect finish on this one. We went heavy distressing with some femininity, which is perfect. Got these beautiful pink florals. Let's show you all my flaws here. First, I'm gonna put you back normal, I guess. There we go. All right. So, first you can see in here, it's cracked. There's a chunk missing. Same in here. Chunk missing, cracks. And then even here, I cut it too short, so there's a line there, strip. But never fear, the solution will be the antiquing gel, and that I will be distressing it. So I'm probably gonna, I might touch up this in here just because that's pretty distinct. So I'll probably get some white and some pink and just kind of brush that in. And then when I run my sander over it, I'll probably just go around the edges a little bit, so it will even hit this and make it look like the distressing's deliberate, which at that point it will be. So it will fit in. It won't look like I completely botched it, which it does now. So there's hope yet. I'm using spray polyacrylic to seal the transfers before I distress. I just want to give them a little more protection so that when I go over it with my sander along the edges, it doesn't rip up the transfer too much. I like to have spray polyacrylic on hand just because it's a convenient tool for things like transfers. If the transfer were on the top of the desk, I would probably apply polyacrylic more heavy with a sponge or a roller or a brush, whatever. But since it's on the sides, having that spray polyacrylic makes it just a more streamlined process. Often when I'm distressing a finish, I use a sheet of paper and I do it by hand. You do tend to have more control in a way by doing that as far as the pressure goes, and with how aggressively it's removing in that spot that you're putting it on. But at the same time, when I do it by hand, I find that sometimes I'm marring up the surrounding finish beyond just the edge that I want to hit. And using a sander, since it's incredibly flat and not conforming like a hand, it's less likely to bump over onto a surface I don't want it to. I can just very gently touch over the raised areas that I want, and it very quickly sands it. So as long as you have a lot of control and you're really gentle, using a sander to distress can actually be really efficient. I like to do it with, I think, 120 grit. We don't want it to be too gritty and grabby, like 60. But using like 220 would be too fine and just fill up your sandpaper too quickly that you can't really get a whole lot done. So I go over all the raised edges. I decided to embrace those flawed areas in my application and just distress where like that crack is that you'll see, and on those edges where it tore a little, I'm just going to distress that so it kind of blends into the finish, and you'll never know that it was user error in getting it on the surface, and it all looks deliberate, and it'll all make sense in the end. I'm now resealing everything with my spray sealer polyacrylic. I'm just going over the areas that I hit with my sander because sanding it removes your top coat, your sealer, wherever it exposed the bare wood. So I'm just running it back over. Any areas that it roughed up your top coat but didn't go beyond the paint, spraying a sealer over that will rehydrate and get rid of any of those dull marks too. So it's just really handy to spray all over. It kind of refinishes the luster that you need in that finish. Now it's time to reinstall the hardware. It's been sprayed a matte black, and I'm actually going to flip them upside down. The Art Deco Waterfall style, I believe, originally had these kind of with an upward curve or a frown position, because you can actually see the indents in the drawers. So I believe they were originally placed with the frown position, but I really like it looking like a smile. So I'm going to turn them around, and that just looks a little bit more natural and contemporary to me. So we're repositioning them this way and moving on to the next step. And voila, she's finished. This was a long journey on getting this piece in a position where it could be loved again. So much peeling and bubbling veneer on the top, and the finish was incredibly worn. But now it's kind of like a tomboy, a little bit of grunge and dirt under the fingernails, but still wanting to dress up in a tutu. So we've got these pink frilly flowers all over it with a really beautiful pop of teal that's contrasting with the pink, and some of that lovely antiquing all over. So I hope you enjoyed this project, and feel free to subscribe to follow along. Thank you for checking out this video from Handmade.